On a cold November night in 1944, with World War II at its peak, something eerie unfolded in the skies over Belgium. A lone B-17 bomber, barely holding together, drifted out of the clouds. Its engines coughed and sputtered, yet somehow the battered plane made a flawless landing at the Allied base. The ground crew rushed toward it, hearts pounding. Planes didn't just look like this and make it back. Major John V. Crisp, leading the charge, braced himself for what they'd find inside. The crew had to be in bad shape, or worse. But when they opened the hatch, there was nothing. No cries for help, no movement, just silence. The cabin was strangely calm, almost untouched. Parachutes were neatly stowed, and a few half-eaten chocolates sat on a ledge, as if the crew had stepped away for a moment. But they weren't there. They were gone. The only clue was a single cryptic message scrawled in the codebook: bad flak. What happened to the crew? How did this plane make it home, flying through enemy skies with no one on board? This wasn't just another war story. This was something far stranger, a mystery that would leave everyone asking, how does a ghost plane come back from the dead? From the start, the Memphis Belle was always destined for greatness. After all, it was a Boeing B-17 bomber. We're talking about a plane that was renowned in perhaps the biggest war in the history of the world for its rugged durability, immense firepower, and critical role in strategic bombing campaigns. Developed in the 1930s by Boeing, this plane had a wingspan of 103 feet 9 inches and a length of 74 feet 4 inches. For comparison, the wingspan was roughly equivalent to the combined length of 10 standard school buses, while the length was roughly the same as the length of a blue whale, or 2 standard semi-truck trailers parked end to end. Standing 19 feet 1 inch tall, this aircraft was massive. But despite its size, the plane flew like a beast. But size aside, what truly made the B-17 great was its unparalleled combination of offensive and defensive capabilities. Nicknamed the Flying Fortress for its ability to defend itself, it was equipped with 13 50 caliber Browning machine guns, strategically placed in the nose, tail, top, and ball turrets, as well as in cheek and waist gunner positions. These guns provided 360-degree defensive coverage, allowing the aircraft to hold its own against waves upon waves of enemy fighters. Like most bombers, the bomber primary mission was to deliver destruction from above, carrying up to 17,600 pounds of bombs. For comparison, that's about the weight of 2 large adult African elephants. Powered by 4 engines delivering 1,200 horsepower each, the B-17 achieved a top speed of 287 miles per hour and cruised comfortably at 182 miles per hour. With a range of about 2,000 miles, which could be extended to 3,750 miles with additional fuel tanks, it could strike deep into enemy territory with relative ease. And as if that wasn't scary enough, its operational ceiling reached an astonishing 35,600 feet, often taking it above the range of enemy anti-aircraft guns. Typically operated by a crew of 10, the aircraft demanded seamless coordination, from the pilot and co-pilot managing the controls to the bombardier and navigator plotting missions. Every crew member played a vital role. The gunners manned their stations with vigilance, ready to fend off enemy fighters, while the radio operator maintained communication in the chaos of battle. But if after all this the B-17 hasn't impressed you, then you haven't heard about its legendary durability. This plane was so durable that even today, stories of B-17s limping back to base with engines failing, wings riddled with holes, and entire sections of the fuselage missing continue to amaze and baffle people. Till the very end, its robust airframe and redundant systems gave crews a fighting chance to survive even the most harrowing missions. With more than 12,000 B-17s being built between 1936 and 1945, the U.S. quite literally ruled the skies. From blueprints to battlefields, the B-17 Flying Fortress soared as a symbol of American ingenuity and grit. Its first missions in the Pacific were a trial by fire, facing Japanese forces head-on, tasked with striking shipping lanes and airfields. The B-17 began to prove its worth, though its early missions were still a bit rough. At the European theater, however, the B-17 truly shocked the world as it etched its name in history. Assigned to daylight bomber raid over Nazi Germany, it became the cornerstone of the Allied air strategy. While the RAF hammered enemy targets by night, the B-17 unleashed relentless destruction by day, dropping over 640,000 tons of bombs on German industrial hubs and military sites. To stop these beasts, the Luftwaffe threw everything at the flying fortress: flak, fighters, and sheer fury. But the tales of this bomber's resilience became a legend, as crews spoke of bombers limping home with shredded tails, missing engines, and even wings torn to ribbons. As B-17 pilot Wally Hoffman said, "The plane can be cut and slashed almost to pieces by enemy fire and still bring its crew home." And perhaps the scariest example of this was what happened to the Phantom Fortress in 1944. On November 23, 1944, the B-17, serial number 4338545, known as the Phantom Fortress, took to the skies on what seemed like just another bombing mission. Its target, the heavily defended Lohe oil refinery at Meseberg, Germany, was a place notorious for its intense anti-aircraft fire. On that day, 9 men bracing for battle climbed into the bomber, each knowing they were heading into one of the most dangerous assignments of the war. As the Phantom Fortress neared its target, hell erupted in the skies above them. Flak exploded in every direction. Enemy fighters closed in with deadly intent. The aircraft was hit again and again and again. The damage was severe. Engines failed. The situation turned grim. And in a desperate move, the crew was ordered to bail out. One by one, they parachuted into the chaos of war, thinking they had abandoned the flying fortress to its inevitable doom. But this B-17 had other plans. Against all odds, like the Phantom it was named after, the battered bomber didn't crash. It somehow kept flying, and did so for hours, cruising aimlessly over the war-torn landscape with its engines sputtering and its wings torn and battered. It seemed as though the Phantom Fortress had a will of its own. Then, as if from a nightmare, it appeared over the Belgian countryside, miles away from the war zone. No one knew it yet, but the Phantom was on a date with history. Ground crew at Sinberg Airfield watched with disbelief as this ghost of a bomber descended, its damaged wings flapping like a wounded bird. Against all odds, it touched down, roughly but controlled, as if someone had their hands on the controls. Major John V. Crisp, leading the ground crew, approached the strange scene, half expecting the crew to be inside, unconscious but alive. But when he stepped inside, what he found made his blood run cold. The interior was eerily silent. The seats were empty. The cockpit was deserted. Even more chilling, inside the fuselage were neatly wrapped parachutes, ready to be clipped on. It was as if the crew had simply stepped out, leaving everything behind. The bomber had, in a move that shocked the world, landed itself. But how? Was it the autopilot, a fluke, or fate? No one really knows to this day. Some say the B-17's rugged construction and sheer will to survive allowed it to make the journey home, even without a crew. Others whispered about luck, or maybe even something a little more sinister. From the Memphis Belle to Lady Luck and My Gal Sal, the B-17 bombers throughout the war created a legend that to this day fills the hearts of Americans worldwide. But perhaps no legend was as worrisome as that of Old 666. Old 666 was an infamous B-17 flying fortress that began its life in the worst possible way, as a cursed machine, abandoned and all but forgotten. Its bad luck was so notorious that it even was slated to be scrapped for others. And even then, many worried that just having a piece of this plane on board would spell doom for others. But what exactly made battle-hardened soldiers in the worst human war of all time so afraid of a single plane? Well, Old 666, officially known as B-17 with serial number 412666, was cursed from the moment it took flight. The ominous 666 and its tail number sent shivers through the crews, as the number was forever tied to dark omens and the devil. From day one, disaster seemed to follow this bomber. Mechanical failures, crashes, and near catastrophes became its hallmark. For anyone brave enough to fly her, it felt like tempting fate. To many, she wasn't just a plane, she was a harbinger of misfortune. But in a weird twist, fate had other plans. In 1942, a group of renegade airmen led by the fearless Captain J. Zemmer saw something no one else did in the cursed plane. Where others saw death, they saw potential. They didn't see a doomed hulk. They saw a chance to resurrect a legend. The crew known as the Eager Beavers took the B-17 and transformed it from a symbol of misfortune into an unrelenting force of destruction. They outfitted it with a staggering 1950 caliber machine guns, more than any other bomber in the war. It was no longer just a flying fortress. It was a beast bristling with firepower, more like a porcupine than a plane. Old 666 was no longer the aircraft cursed by the devil's number 666. It was reborn. No longer just an omen of bad luck, it became the most heavily armed bomber in the Pacific theater. Each modification seemed more absurd than the last, as though they were daring fate to challenge them. And fate heard their call because challenge them it did, as their ultimate test came on June 16, 1943. When Captain Zemmer and his crew embarked on a photo reconnaissance mission over Buin, a heavily fortified Japanese stronghold. From the very beginning, the mission was a death sentence, as Captain Zemmer knew the risks. But this was no ordinary crew. An old 666 was no ordinary plane. As they approached their target, the skies exploded. Mitsubishi A6M Zeros swarmed like vultures, intent on sending the fortress crashing to the ground. They came in from every angle, below, behind, and head-on. It was one of the most intense air battles of the Pacific War. The Eager Beavers, however, doubled down and fought back with a ferocity that would have made their names immortal, even if they hadn't survived the ordeal. Captain Zemmer and Bombardier Sergeant Joe Sarnowski manned the guns, taking down several enemy fighters despite their own injuries. At one point, Sarnowski, bloodied and near death, crawled back to his station to fire again, taking out another Zero before finally succumbing to his wounds. The damage to old 666 was catastrophic. Its fuselage was riddled with holes, its engines sputtering and barely holding together. The crew, gravely wounded, could barely stay conscious, but still, the bomber held together, defying every expectation. Captain Zemmer, though battered and bruised, simply refused to let the plane fall into enemy hands. And then, after what felt like an eternity, the Japanese fighters broke off, leaving the battered but unbroken bomber to limp back to base. It was nothing short of a miracle. In the end, the crew was awarded the highest honors for their heroism. Captain Zemmer and Sergeant Sarnowski received the Medal of Honor, making them the most highly decorated aircrew in American history. As for the rest of the crew, they earned Distinguished Service Crosses, and old 666, once thought to be cursed, had survived the impossible and secured its place in the pantheon of wartime legends. Speaking of the pantheon of wartime legends, one of the most impressive to this day was the B-17 named My Gal Sal. My Gal Sal was one of the B-17s built to face the horrors of the European skies, and like many of her sisters, she had a tough start. But this aircraft had a unique charm, and that set her apart, as if fate had stitched something special into her fuselage. Her crew, who came to know her as more than just a bomber, was drawn together by an unshakable belief. My Gal Sal was destined to do the impossible. From the start, she was a fighter. The skies over Germany were full of danger, but My Gal Sal seemed to laugh in the face of adversity. Enemy fire, she shrugged it off. Flak, she plowed through it like it was nothing. Her crew, a group of hardened airmen led by the determined Captain William MacDonald, knew every mission was a risk. Yet My Gal Sal had a way of making it seem like fate was on their side. She was the kind of plane that took hits, bled oil, and lost parts, but kept flying, steady as a heartbeat, inching closer to victory. It wasn't long before she earned a reputation as one of the most resilient bombers in the fleet. On mission after mission, My Gal Sal would return home, often barely held together by luck, skill, and sheer willpower. She was hit more than once, yet always made it back to base, her crew alive, her spirit unbroken. But what really set her apart was what happened on June 17, 1942. On that day, Sal found itself at the mercy of unforgiving weather while en route to England. The crew had become disoriented by thick fog and poor visibility over the North Atlantic, and somehow the aircraft veered off course and was forced to make an emergency landing on the Greenland ice cap, an inhospitable wasteland of snow and ice. With no way of contacting help, the crew faced a harrowing 10-day ordeal. Stranded on the ice, they battled freezing temperatures and limited supplies. But somehow, despite the hopelessness of their situation, the crew managed to send out an SOS, a beacon of hope that eventually reached rescuers. After a tense and exhausting wait, the crew was finally rescued, their lives saved by their determination and resourcefulness. My gal Sal herself, however, was left behind, buried in the ice for over 50 years. Incredibly though, the bomber was recovered in 1995 and later restored, becoming a symbol of resilience and survival. Up until today, the story of My Gal Sal is one of daring, survival, and the enduring spirit of the crew who faced the icy grip of nature and lived to tell the tale. Today, the B-17 is remembered as a symbol of resilience, courage, and mystery, with its eerie tales of ghost planes and cursed aircraft still haunting the annals of World War II history. But what do you think? Which of these planes shocked you the most? Was the Phantom Fortress truly a stroke of luck? Or did something more sinister guide its flight back? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're at it, don't miss our deep dive into another legendary B-17, the Memphis Belle. Click here to learn more about its impact on the war and its place in history. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join us for more incredible stories from the skies. Until next time, take care.